If you're seeing this, it isn't a coincidence, a recommendation, or an algorithmic accident. You were called. Something in you has been vibrating just slightly out of phase with the version of reality you pretend to belong to. You keep living in the same rooms, walking the same streets, scrolling the same screens, but there is a quiet dissonance underneath it all, like a radio picking up a station from another world that no one else seems to hear. That signal is why you are here. You haven't just discovered this message. It has finally reached the point in time where you could. Somewhere beyond your five senses, your consciousness has been entangled with a higher timeline, a version of you who already chose differently, already remembered, already stepped off the conveyor belt of unconscious repetition. That version of you has been sending data back through the quantum field, glimpses, déjà vu, sudden surges of clarity, strange inner refusals when you try to go back to old patterns. You called those mood swings. They were timeline interference. You've noticed it, haven't you? The way certain thoughts feel like they don't belong to your old self. The way some opportunities feel impossibly too aligned. The way people exit your life with surgical precision right before you would have abandoned yourself again. You assumed it was random, or unfair, or just another chaotic season. It wasn't chaos. It was calibration. In quantum physics, entanglement means two particles can become so deeply linked that changing one instantly affects the other, no matter how far apart they are in space. The same phenomenon exists in consciousness. There is a you who already stands on a higher timeline, a reality field built on coherence instead of fragmentation, on self-trust instead of self-betrayal, on lucid choosing instead of autopilot survival. That self is not separate from you. It is entangled with you, broadcasting through every subtle intuition you keep trying to rationalize away. Every time you felt a no in your body but said yes with your mouth. Every time you knew the room was wrong for your nervous system but stayed anyway. Every time your chest tightened before your mind found reasons to ignore it. Those were missed transmissions. This is a direct one. The moment you press play on a message like this, you collapse a wave of potential into a single act of observation. The observer effect is not just a textbook idea. It's the architecture of your life. By bringing awareness to this exact moment, you are already shifting probabilities in the field. You are choosing, whether you admit it or not, which version of you gets to keep writing your story. There is a reason the timing feels eerie why this finds you on this day, in this emotional weather, after the exact series of events that have been draining you, cracking you, hollowing out your previous certainty. Higher timelines rarely activate when you feel strong and satisfied. They tend to pierce through in the quiet after collapse. Right here, when you are tired of your own repetition, you're not being punished, you're being invited. You've tried to name it so many times. The ache, the restlessness, the sense that your life doesn't quite fit you. On paper, you can explain your story using ordinary language. Stress, burnout, wrong relationships, lack of purpose, unresolved childhood patterns. You've read the books, watched the talks, tried to reframe, reparent, rewire, and yet, even after all that effort, something deeper keeps slipping through your fingers. A subtle awareness that what's wrong isn't just inside you, it's in the timeline itself. You feel like you're walking through a version of reality that was built for a previous you, a ghost wearing clothes that don't belong to it anymore. Look at the patterns that loop in your life, the way different people carry the same emotional script, the way new jobs feel like old prisons with better branding, the way your inner monologue always finds its way back to the same wound, no matter how many fresh starts you manufacture. From a purely psychological lens, this is familiar. Repetition, compulsion, attachment style, trauma reenactment. But underneath those labels, something else is happening. Your nervous system has been trained in one timeline, a low-resolution reality where survival is the main program, while another timeline has been quietly coming online, one that your current identity doesn't know how to inhabit yet. So you feel torn, double exposed. In quantum terms, it's like your life has become a superposition, multiple possible versions coexisting, none fully collapsed into form. You wake up with the memory of a different life you haven't lived yet. You walk through your day with the feeling that something massive is supposed to happen, but no external evidence explains it. You lie in bed at night and feel a pressure in your chest like a door that refuses to stay shut. You call it anxiety, But notice how intelligent it is. Notice how your so-called anxiety spikes right before you try to agree to something that betrays you. Notice how the heaviness in your body intensifies around certain people who feed your old narrative. Notice how your lack of motivation sometimes isn't laziness at all, but an internal refusal to keep feeding energy into a future you no longer consent to. That is the higher timeline interfering. Not gently, not politely, but precisely, because in the language of the quantum field, your choices are not neutral. Each yes and no is a vote cast into a branching structure of realities, strengthening some paths and starving others. When you obey the script of your old self, the one trained by fear, scarcity, and people-pleasing, you reinforce a timeline where your soul is background noise. When you dare to follow the quieter, stranger impulse, the one that feels irrational but deeply correct, you begin to route energy toward the higher strand that has been waiting for you. This is why your life has felt like it's breaking down. Timelines don't separate cleanly. They shear, they grind. As the higher timeline activates, it starts to pull your awareness out of environments that can't survive in it. Friend groups that run on gossip instead of truth begin to feel intolerable. Work that only feeds the external image but starves your inner world starts to feel like a slow suffocation. Even your own coping mechanisms, the distractions, the compulsions, the reflexive self-minimizing begin to taste poisonous in your mouth. You think you're failing. You think you're losing discipline, consistency, commitment. But what if? What's really failing is your compatibility with the outdated version of you that those patterns were built for. What if the very systems you're mourning, the friendships, the roles, the identities you can't maintain, were never designed to hold the signal you're carrying now? The higher timeline does not negotiate with your comfort. It negotiates with your truth. So it lets certain structures crack. It withholds the false satisfaction you used to get from shrinking yourself. It stops letting you feel safe in cages you've outgrown. And in that friction, your mind panics, while your deeper self exhales in relief. The paradox is brutal. You feel like everything is falling apart, even as a more accurate life begins to assemble itself just beyond your current perception. You are not malfunctioning. You are being recalibrated. The question is no longer, what's wrong with me? The real question is, what if nothing is wrong with you and everything is wrong with the timeline you've been running? There is a version of you watching you right now, not metaphorically, not poetically, literally, from another coordinate in the field. You have felt their presence in fragments, the sudden rush of calm in the middle of panic, the inexplicable sense that it will be okay when nothing in your current circumstances justifies that conclusion. The way you occasionally speak words of wisdom to a friend and realize, in the echo afterward, that you were also speaking to yourself. That was not random insight, that was bleed-through. In the quantum field, entanglement means information can be shared without traveling through space in the way you're used to. The higher version of you, the one already stabilized on the more coherent timeline, doesn't send you encouragement as if across a distance. It resonates you into remembering what you already are. It doesn't push you, it pulls you. This is why some choices feel less like decisions and more like inevitabilities. You don't think your way into them, you recognize them. Think about the moments in your life when you surprised yourself by acting out of character in the best possible way. When you told the truth instead of performing, when you walked away instead of clinging, when you chose rest instead of self-punishment. In those moments, your behavior jumped ahead of your narrative. Your story about who you are didn't have time to catch up. That is what contact feels like. You become temporarily fluent in a future self. Your higher self is not a distant, glowing archetype waiting to approve you once you've fixed enough of your flaws. It is a fully formed pattern of consciousness that already knows how to inhabit the life you keep glimpsing in your daydreams and dismissing as unrealistic. It has already integrated the lessons you are still looping. It has already passed the tests you keep mistaking for punishment. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Every time you ignore its guidance, you feel it as self-betrayal. You call it overthinking. You call it talking yourself out of it. But underneath that, what's really happening is decoherence. In physics, decoherence is what happens when a delicate quantum state gets tangled up with its noisy environment and collapses into something ordinary. In your life, decoherence looks like this. You touch a moment of clarity, your body lights up with knowing, and then you invite in witnesses who don't carry that frequency. You explain your revelation to people committed to smaller realities. You ask permission from the very systems that benefit from your confusion. The signal scrambles. The higher self fades into the background again. You don't lose the connection. You drown it. But the entanglement never actually breaks. That is the mercy built into this design. No matter how many times you choose against yourself, the higher you stays locked in phase with you, adjusting, rerouting, finding new ways to reach your awareness. What you call synchronicities, repeated numbers, meaningful coincidences, oddly specific song lyrics at the exact right moment are not the universe trying to impress you with tricks. They are calibration markers, signals along the tunnel between where you are and where you're already becoming. You notice them more when you stop numbing, when the distractions lose their flavor, when the constant noise of comparison, consumption, and self-critique gets boring enough that silence becomes interesting again. In that stillness, the gap between you and your higher self thins. You start to feel the subtle differences between fear and warning, between excitement and resonance, between impulse and instruction. Fear shouts, your higher self doesn't need to. Its voice is steady, almost anticlimactic in how simple it sounds. Leave, rest, call, create, stop. One syllable commands contained inside full body knowing. And because you've been conditioned to equate importance with drama, you keep waiting for something bigger, louder, more cinematic. Meanwhile, the higher timeline keeps sliding invitations across the table in the form of ordinary moments. The real portal is never the sensational event. It is the small decision made differently. Right now, even as you listen, that entangled self is mapping this moment as a pivot point. It knows what happens if you treat this as another interesting idea to forget tomorrow. It also knows what unfolds if you begin to relate to your life as a synchronization process rather than a punishment. One path keeps you rehearsing the same identity, editing yourself to stay digestible. The other path asks for something much more costly. It asks you to stop pretending you don't know, because you do know in your bones, in the tightening of your jaw, in the way your heart reacts before your mind forms opinions. You know what doesn't belong anymore. You know who you shrink around. You know the habits that make you blurry. You know which dreams aren't aesthetic fantasies but actual assignments. Contact isn't coming, it's happening. The question is whether you will keep translating it into language small enough to fit your old life, or allow your life to expand, to hold the size of what you're truly in conversation with. You think you're the only one changing. You're not. The field around you is already responding. Once contact with the higher self becomes sustained, your reality matrix stops behaving like a solid wall and starts confessing that it was always a set of probabilities. The people in your life, the opportunities, the crises you keep meeting, all of them are expressions of the patterns you're running in your consciousness. When those patterns shift, the environment has no choice but to adapt or fall away. This is where it gets uncomfortable, because the first sign that the higher timeline has activated is loss. You feel it as friendships that quietly decay, conversations that no longer land, invitations that stop arriving, plans that mysteriously fall through. The old you would have taken it personally and tried to fix it, hustling to re-earn your place in rooms that are already phasing out of relevance. But if you zoom out to the level of the quantum field, something else is happening. The field is decommissioning realities you no longer belong to. In quantum physics, when a system moves toward a new stable state, there is a period of turbulence, a phase transition where old structures dissolve so new order can emerge. Water boiling into steam, iron becoming magnetized, a particle cloud collapsing into a defined position when measured. Your life is in its own phase transition. The boiling you feel is not chaos for its own sake. It is latent potential turning into visible form. Of course, your nervous system flares. It was trained to equate familiarity with safety. So when familiar dynamics begin to dissolve, your survival circuits light up. You're alone. You're failing. You're being left behind. Those interpretations are old software trying to explain a process it was never designed to understand. The higher timeline isn't punishing you by taking things away, it is subtracting what can't carry your next signal without distorting it. Notice the pattern of what leaves. It's rarely the relationships that honor your honesty. It's rarely the work that engages your deepest intelligence. It's rarely the practices that bring your nervous system into coherence. No, what tends to fall apart are the arrangements that ran on your self-abandonment, the dynamics that needed you to be smaller, confused, endlessly apologizing for existing, the roles that demanded you perform stability while disintegrating quietly in private. These collapse first. They can't survive in a coherent field. Coherence is not just a poetic word. It describes alignment when your thoughts, feelings, intentions, and actions stop pulling in different directions and start moving as one organism. A coherent heart-brain state is measurable. Rhythms synchronize, noise decreases. The body moves out of fight or flight into a more intelligent mode of functioning. On a timeline level, coherence looks like this. You stop saying yes while meaning no. Stop hiding what you know. Stop bending your perception to protect other people's illusions. As coherence increases, the field responds by amplifying what matches and eroding what doesn't. That's why new encounters begin to feel strangely precise. You meet someone at the exact moment you were willing to be seen differently. A conversation drops one sentence that rearranges your entire understanding. An opportunity appears that would have terrified your previous identity but feels quietly inevitable to the version emerging now. You're not lucky. You're resonant. Synchronicity is what happens when the outer field stops having to shout to get your attention. It can whisper. It can deliver fine-tuned events instead of blunt force lessons. But there is a catch. The more precise the alignment, the more costly your self-betrayal becomes. Because once you know a connection is exact, you also know what it will cost to step into it fully, the identities you'll have to drop, the performances you'll have to retire, the control you'll have to release. This is why you oscillate. One day, you feel ready to burn your old life and step into the unknown. The next day, you cling to the smallest familiar comfort, as if your survival depended on it. You are not weak for oscillating. You are standing at the interference pattern of two realities. One built from habit, one built from truth. As they overlap, you feel both their gravitational pulls. The lower timeline offers you predictability at the price of numbness. The higher timeline offers you aliveness at the price of certainty. Most people choose predictability. They call it being realistic. They tell themselves elaborate stories about timing, responsibility, and not wanting to be selfish. When the deeper truth is simpler, they are terrified of existing without their old pain. As an organizing principle, you are being asked to make a different kind of choice, not a dramatic, cinematic leap for an audience. A quiet, internal reorientation toward what is real for you, regardless of how well it fits anyone else's narrative. This is the moment where the higher timeline stops being a beautiful idea and becomes a demand, not from some external authority, but from the core of your own being that is tired of being treated like a side character in its own life. Reality is rearranging, with or without your conscious cooperation. The only question is whether you will keep interpreting dismantling as failure or start recognizing it as the exact evidence that your entanglement with the higher timeline is no longer theoretical. It's operational. Now that it's operational, the field stops tolerating your amnesia. It starts demanding participation. There comes a point where you can't unknow what you've seen. You can't unfeel the discrepancy between the life you're performing and the life that fits your actual frequency. You can't keep blaming fate, luck, or other people's choices for a reality that is being shaped, moment by what you choose to observe, what you rehearse, what you consent to. This is the threshold, not out there, in you. In quantum mechanics, nothing exists as a fixed thing until it is measured. Before that, it lives as a cloud of probabilities, a wave of possibility that could crystallize into multiple outcomes. The act of observation doesn't just reveal what was already there, it participates in what becomes real. Your consciousness does the same thing every time you decide what your experience means. You think you are reporting on reality. You are, in truth, collapsing it. When something difficult happens, notice the first storyline that rises in your mind. Of course, this happens to me. Nothing ever works out. People always leave. I can't trust anyone. I'm behind. I'm too late. I'm too much. These are not neutral descriptions. They are measurements, unconscious observations that lock your nervous system into a specific version of the world and then keep feeding evidence into it. You believe you're being honest. You're actually being loyal to an old timeline. The higher timeline doesn't deny what's happening. It interprets it differently. It doesn't say, I'm happy this is painful. It says, this is precise. This is data. This is an intersection between my old pattern and my new frequency. It lets you feel the grief, the anger, the fear, without turning those sensations into a verdict about your worth or your future. This is the training of the observer. You are not being asked to bypass your human experience. You are being initiated into the capacity to witness your own reactions without merging with them, to feel the contraction in your chest and still know, beneath it, that something larger in you is completely unthreatened, to watch your thoughts spiral and still know that the one who is aware of the spiral is not inside the storm. At first, this feels like a fragile skill. Then it starts to feel like home. You catch yourself mid-story and pause. You notice the familiar script loading and, instead of pressing play, you breathe. You give your system 10 seconds of pure attention, no commentary. In those 10 seconds, you are doing something most people never do in their entire lives. You are choosing awareness over reflex. That tiny pause is not a self-help trick. It is an act of quantum engineering, because in that pause, the wave of possibility has not fully collapsed yet. The emotion is present, the trigger is real, but the meaning is not cemented. Your old timeline rushes in with its pre-written interpretation, but your higher self is also present, offering a different angle. Look closer. What if this is removal, not rejection? What if this is redirection, not failure? What if this is confirmation that you no longer fit where you once begged to be accepted? You stand between two measurements. Whichever one you stabilize with your attention becomes the scaffolding for your next reality. This is why distraction has become so effective at stealing lives. It's not just wasting your time. It's constantly collapsing the field in favor of the lowest, loudest storyline. Every time you numb out instead of witnessing yourself, you outsource the act of observation to algorithms, inherited beliefs, and unexamined fears. They will always choose the version of reality that keeps you predictable. The higher timeline requires something more dangerous. It asks you to sit in the rawness of the uncollapsed moment, to feel the urge to run, to fix, to text, to prove, and instead stay still enough to let a new meaning arise from a deeper place. This is not passivity. It is delayed measurement. You refuse to label the moment from the vantage point of your wound. You wait until your awareness is present enough to see from the vantage point of your wholeness. At first, this will feel like death to your ego, because your ego survives by narrating everything immediately. But as you practice, a different kind of stability begins to appear. Not the brittle stability of control, but the quiet stability of trust in your own perception. You stop needing everyone else to validate what you feel. You stop collecting consensus before moving. You stop collapsing your reality into the smallest, safest story. You start to see yourself as an instrument of measurement in the quantum field. Your attention becomes deliberate. Your words become precise. You notice how saying, "I'm broken" feels different in your body than saying, "I'm in transition." You notice how telling yourself, "I'm lost," shuts down possibility, while "I'm between versions of myself" leaves the field open. You start to recognize that every description you give your life is not just commentary, it is construction. This is the observer at the threshold. This is the you who is no longer content to unconsciously authorize timelines that cost you your aliveness. And once you see that your observation is an instrument, not an afterthought, another realization dawns with almost frightening clarity. If your attention can collapse reality by accident, what could happen if you began to use it on purpose? When you start using your attention on purpose, the world doesn't instantly turn into light and ease. At first, it resists you, or more accurately, it mirrors your mixed signals. You say you want alignment, but you still feed energy into misalignment. You say you want truth, but you still reward those who lie to you by staying. You say you want peace, but you still reach for the exact inputs that agitate your nervous system. The field is neutral. It amplifies what you actually practice, not what you romantically prefer. So the training begins here. You start treating your life as a laboratory instead of a courtroom. This isn't about proving you're worthy. It's about running experiments in coherence. You become curious about the smallest unit of shift you can make, the micro movements where the higher timeline can anchor itself. You stop waiting for a giant mystical event to change everything and start noticing the leverage hidden in ordinary choices. You don't need incense, mantras, or perfect conditions. You need precision. Imagine your attention as a beam. Wherever you point it, the quantum field collapses into more of that reality. Most people allow their beam to be hijacked by fear, outrage, comparison. They walk through life with their awareness scattered like static, wondering why nothing changes. You are being asked to become a deliberate operator of this beam. You begin with what's immediate, your body. The body is the first place the timeline speaks. Long before your mind crafts stories, your chest tightens, your gut clenches, your shoulders rise, your jaw hardens. These micro-signals are not inconveniences to be anesthetized. They are diagnostic tools. They tell you when your energy is leaving your authentic path and pouring into a false one. So you watch. When your phone lights up with a name that makes your stomach drop, you don't override it with politeness. You observe. What does my system know that my mind is refusing to admit? When you sit down to work that looks good on paper but makes your soul feel anesthetized, you notice the heaviness. What am I trying to earn by betraying my own intelligence? When you scroll and feel your self-respect eroding one tiny comparison at a time, you don't shame yourself. You simply see the cost. Observation without self-hatred, just data. Then, you begin to redirect the beam. Not dramatically precisely. You choose one thing each day that feels like it belongs to the higher timeline. Not 10. 1. A conversation where you tell the truth instead of performing. A boundary you articulate instead of hinting at. A creative impulse you honor instead of postponing indefinitely. A moment of rest you give yourself without demanding productivity as justification. You anchor your attention in how that feels, not the fear that rises around it, the underlying rightness. You're not manifesting in the way you were taught, trying to wrestle the universe into giving you what your ego wants. You are stabilizing a frequency in your own system and letting the field adjust. You are saying, through action, this is my new baseline. The field listens to baselines, not fantasies. Of course, resistance appears. Old patterns fire like alarms. This is selfish. This is dangerous. No one will stay if you change. People who benefited from your confusion might accuse you of becoming cold, distant, difficult. Systems that fed on your compliance might react like you've broken an unspoken contract. The temptation will be to interpret this as proof that you're doing something wrong. Look closer. In physics, when a system approaches a critical threshold, fluctuations intensify. Things seem more chaotic right before a new order locks in. Emotionally, this feels like doubt spiking just as you're about to break a pattern. It feels like loneliness thickening just as you stop accepting crumbs. It feels like fear roaring just as you step out of the cage. These are not signs you're off path. They are the last negotiations of a dying timeline. You train the field by refusing to negotiate. You can grieve, shake, cry, question, but you do not go back to betraying yourself just to lower the noise. You let the noise crest and collapse. You let people reveal their true relationship to your truth. You let former versions of you mourn the routines they used to call safety. In that unwavering attention, a strange thing happens. What used to drain you loses its grip. Not because you fought it, but because you stopped feeding it with your focus. The chat threads that once consumed you go silent. The internal monologues that used to devour hours lose their intensity. The compulsion to check, recheck, seek reassurance begins to feel dull. Simultaneously, new currents appear. Ideas arrive with a sense of inevitability. People show up who speak your inner language without you having to translate. Resources surface not as lottery wins, but as exact next steps that match the frequency you've been stabilizing. None of it feels like a miracle. It feels like overdue logistics catching up with an identity that finally declared itself. You are not forcing the universe to bend. You are aligning with the version of reality that already contains what matches your coherence. This is training, Not because you need to become something you are not, but because you are dismantling the reflexes that kept you living as less than what you are. The higher timeline isn't a reward in the distance. It is the natural environment for a self that refuses to lie to itself anymore. And as you continue to train the field through the precision of your attention, something even more radical begins to reveal itself. You are not just learning how to inhabit a higher reality. You are learning how to carry it with you wherever you go. As the higher reality stabilizes in you, it stops being only about you. It never was. You were not just entangled with a higher timeline for your personal comfort upgrade, your private peace, your individual storyline of success. You are a node in a larger network, a living junction where multiple human timelines intersect. When your field changes, the interference pattern changes around you. People feel it, even if they never learn the language to describe what happened. You've already seen traces of this. The way someone suddenly opens up around you after years of emotional lockdown. The way a casual conversation with you becomes the moment they quietly decide to leave what's destroying them. The way your refusal to tolerate certain patterns exposes those patterns for everyone else in the room. You didn't give them a lecture. You didn't hand them a doctrine. You simply existed differently. Your coherence disrupted the local field. Neuroscience calls this mirror neurons, interpersonal regulation, attachment templates shifting. Systems theory calls it change at one node, altering the dynamics of the entire system. Morphic resonance suggests that once a new pattern is established, it becomes easier for others to access. The language varies, but the implication is the same. When you stabilize in a higher timeline, you become a portal for others, not by rescuing them, by refusing to betray yourself in their presence. Most of your life, you were trained to dim your awareness to accommodate the room. You learned to ignore what you sensed so other people wouldn't feel confronted. You laughed at what didn't feel funny, agreed with what didn't feel true, softened your boundaries so no one had to meet themselves more honestly. That was timeline maintenance, keeping the collective reality locked at a level everyone had silently agreed not to question. The higher timeline ends that contract. When you stand in your coherence, you don't attack anyone. You don't need to. Your very presence introduces a new reference point. This is what it feels like when someone is not abandoning themselves to keep the illusion intact. That contrast alone becomes unbearable to certain dynamics. People will either rise into more honesty or move away. Both outcomes are precise. You become diagnostic to the field. Some will feel judged by your existence, even if you never say a word about their choices. What they experience as judgment is often just the discomfort of being near someone who won't participate in their preferred story. Some will misunderstand your boundaries as coldness, because they only recognize warmth when it comes wrapped in self-sacrifice. Some will try to pull you back into the old rhythm, testing whether your new stance is negotiable. This is where your training matters. If you collapse back into performance to soothe their discomfort, you confirm the old reality. Coherence is unstable. Truth is negotiable, the higher timeline is optional. But when you remain anchored, heart open, spine strong, not apologizing for your clarity, you transmit an entirely different signal into the collective field. It is possible to be kind without abandoning yourself. It is possible to be honest without being cruel. It is possible to change without needing everyone to come with you. You won't always see the results. Someone might roll their eyes at your boundary today and secretly use it as a template. 3 years from now, someone might exit your life dramatically, then later tell their therapist, "I once knew a person who just didn't bend that way. I can't stop thinking about it." Your name won't be in their story, but your frequency will be. That's entanglement at work, information propagating through the field in ways you can't trace on a timeline. The ego hates this. It wants visible proof, recognition, immediate feedback. But the higher timeline trains you to act without audience, to choose without applause, to trust that every moment you stay loyal to truth over comfort, you are writing into the collective archive of what is possible for a human being. You are not just healing your trauma, you are altering the probability landscape for others who share your pattern. This is why your standards have risen, not as a performance of superiority, but as a consequence of resonance. You literally cannot anchor certain frequencies in environments that ridicule them. You cannot embody a new level of self-respect while constantly exposing yourself to people who benefit from your self-contempt. So the field orchestrates separations, and your task is not to chase after what's leaving just because loneliness stings. You are not being isolated, you are being tuned. Tuned so that when you do stand in a room, a meeting, a family gathering, a quiet conversation with a stranger, your presence is not random background noise. It is a coherent signal that subtly invites every nervous system around you to consider a different way of being. Some will resist, some will relax, some will remember. You are not responsible for their choice. You are responsible for the signal you keep emitting. This is what it means to become a walking portal. Every space you enter gains access to the higher timeline you've stabilized in yourself. Not everyone will walk through it, but they will all at some level know it was there. Every portal implies a choice, not once, continually. You imagine a single dramatic crossroads where you finally choose your higher timeline and never struggle again. The reality is more precise and far less romantic. Bifurcation, the splitting of timelines, doesn't happen in one cinematic instant. It unfolds through a series of seemingly ordinary decisions where you either reinforce your old pattern or side with your emerging self. From the outside, nothing looks supernatural. On the level of the field, everything is rearranging. In complex systems, bifurcation points are thresholds where small changes in initial conditions produce radically different outcomes. Rivers split, weather patterns diverge. A heart decides to stay or to leave. On the human timeline, your bifurcation points look like this. You feel the familiar urge to minimize yourself to keep the peace. You don't. You feel the reflex to stay, apologize, contort. You leave, quietly, without theatrics. You feel the seduction of numbing out when an old wound gets touched. You stay present long enough to let it move through. To most of the world, these moments look forgettable. To the field, they are structural edits. Each time you align with truth over habit, you tilt your trajectory a few degrees. A few degrees don't look like much in a single moment, but extended over months, years, lifetimes, they land you in entirely different realities. This is the bifurcation you are standing inside. The lower timeline will always offer you reasons to stay. It will weaponize your empathy, your loyalty, your history. It will whisper, you owe it to them, you owe it to the past, you owe it to the version of you that survived this far. It will frame stagnation as devotion, self-erasure as maturity, exhaustion as proof you're doing enough. The higher timeline speaks more simply. It asks one brutal question. Is this true for you? Not. Is this comfortable? Not. Is this familiar? Not. Will they approve? Is this true for you in your nervous system, in your bones, in your unedited awareness, when you stop rehearsing the script you were handed? When the answer is no, the bifurcation is immediate. Not in outer circumstances, those often lag, but in allegiance. In that instant, your loyalty shifts from the timeline built on your survival strategies to the timeline built on your actual essence. You may still, for a while, act as if you chose the old way, but internally, the contract is already broken. This is why certain situations have started to feel unbearable faster than before. Where you once could tolerate emotional noise for years, now you feel done in weeks, days, hours. Where you once could contort yourself to fit, now your body refuses participation. You find yourself incapable of sending the reassuring text you would have sent, incapable of pretending the joke didn't land as a cut, incapable of forcing enthusiasm for what drains you. You interpret this as losing your resilience. You are actually losing your compatibility with self-betrayal. The bifurcation is not just between you and other people. It is between you and the version of you that believed suffering was the only honest way to live. Every time you choose not to reenact the old scene, that version loses gravitational pull. It still shouts. It still rattles your cage, but it has less and less mass. The higher timeline gains it. On a collective level, this is happening everywhere. People are quietly exiting lives that look successful but feel dead. Institutions are cracking under the weight of their own dishonesty. Narratives that once held entire populations in place are deteriorating at their edges. It will be explained as politics, economics, culture. Underneath, it is a shift in what humans are willing to call normal. You are not separate from that. You are one of the fault lines where the new reality is breaking through. This is why your inner work matters more than you think. Not because you are the main character of the world you're not, but because each stabilized node of coherence lowers the threshold for others to cross. When you refuse to live from self-contempt, you make it fractionally easier for someone with your same wound to imagine another way. When you build a life around your actual frequency, you smuggle that possibility into the collective field as an available pattern. You won't get a certificate for this. You will get responsibility. Responsibility to stop indulging the fantasy that your choices are private. Responsibility to stop pretending your self-abandonment harms no one as long as you smile. Responsibility to recognize that every time you collapse back into your old story, you're not just delaying your own relief, you're reinforcing the prison for others who haven't yet found the door. This is not pressure. It is clarity. You are standing at a recurring gate. Each time it appears, you will either walk as the self who remembers or as the self who forgets on purpose. The gate doesn't punish, it measures. It registers which frequency you stabilize in and routes your experience accordingly. At some point, the repetitions run out. The divergence becomes wide enough that moving back and forth between timelines is no longer possible in the same way. One reality will feel like a memory you can't quite touch. The other will feel like the only place you can breathe. The choices you make now are not small. They are how you decide which side of that divergence you will inhabit when the split is no longer theoretical, but fully lived. At some point, you stop asking, will the higher timeline choose me? You understand. You are the choosing mechanism. There isn't a cosmic lottery where a few worthy individuals are plucked out of their lives and granted enlightenment while everyone else stays in the noise. There is entanglement. There is resonance. There is the relentless precision of your own daily actions. The chosen are not favored. They are willing. The question is no longer, am I selected? The question is, which version of me am I feeding? Every day, you wake up inside a body that remembers both realities. Your muscles remember the flinch towards self-erasure. Your nervous system remembers how to brace for disappointment before anything even happens. Your mind remembers the quick, familiar route into self-blame. But your cells also remember something older, a blueprint that existed before the coping mechanisms. Call it your original configuration, a template of coherence you carried long before you were trained to distort yourself to fit into environments that couldn't hold it. You feel it sometimes right after waking, in those first seconds before your thoughts reassemble. For a brief moment, there is only clarity, spaciousness, a sense of rightness that doesn't need reasons. Then the old software boots up, and the day begins. Living as the chosen version means protecting that original signal long enough for it to set the tone. You start before the world reaches you, not because of a productivity hack, but because of sovereignty. You take back the first moments of your day from other people's timelines. No notification gets to be your first contact with reality. No feed gets to collapse your field before you've even remembered who is holding the attention that will shape your entire day. So you pause. You breathe not as a wellness trend, but as a mechanical reset. Inhale, exhale, slowly enough that your nervous system realizes it is not being chased. You feel your body from the inside, the weight of it, the currents of sensation, the small areas of tightness that tell the story of where you still don't trust reality to hold you. You don't fix them, you witness them. Then, with deliberate cruelty toward your old story, you choose one thought, not an affirmation you don't believe, not a glittering fantasy to escape into, a simple orientation command. Today, I will not lie to myself. Or, today, I will not explain away what my body knows. Or, today, I will act as if my perception matters. One line, you let it sink in like code. Throughout the day, you treat every interaction as a micro-test of that code. Not with paranoia, but with precision. When you feel yourself about to say yes, while every part of you is contracting, you remember your line. When you start dimming your truth in a conversation to protect someone's comfort, you remember your line. When you reach for the familiar distraction to avoid feeling, you remember your line. You don't always pass, but you always notice. The noticing is the difference. In the old timeline, you would drift for months, before realizing you'd abandoned yourself again. In the higher timeline, deviation hurts faster. That pain is not punishment, it's early detection. The system pings you immediately. You just fed the wrong version. So you correct course sooner. You send the follow-up message that tells the truth. You cancel what you agreed to from fear. You apologize not for your boundary, but for having communicated from misalignment. You bring your behavior back into phase with your inner knowing. This is embodiment, not a mystical state where you float above human mess, but the gritty practice of making your external life match your internal frequency as closely as possible. You change what you eat not from shame, but because your body is an instrument and you're done treating it like disposable equipment. You alter your surroundings, the objects in your room, the media you consume, the conversations you entertain, because you understand that everything you let into your field is either stabilizing your chosen reality or destabilizing it. People will feel the difference. Some will say you've changed, and they'll be right. Your eyes will track differently. You won't scan rooms for threats in the same way. You won't preemptively shrink. You won't rush to fill silence with self-deprecation. You will sit inside your own presence without apology. That stillness will be more disruptive than any speech you could give. Others will feel like they are meeting you for the first time, even if they have known you for years. That's because, in a real sense, they are. The version you're allowing to occupy your life now is one that previously only existed as a possibility, a branch in the probability tree that you kept admiring from a distance. You've stepped onto that branch. It is now the trunk. Are you finished? No. You will still be triggered. You will still forget. You will still wake up some days and feel like the old gravity has returned, but the deeper rhythm has changed. You no longer interpret every setback as evidence that nothing is real. You see them as turbulence in a system that is, overall, reconfiguring around a new center of mass. That new center is simple. You trust your own perception more than you trust your conditioning. From there, life starts assembling itself differently. The conversations you attract, the work that finds you, the crises that no longer show up because you don't need them to wake up, all of it reflects a shift that began in private, when you decided to stop waiting to be chosen by some external force and recognized the truth. The higher timeline activated the moment you stopped negotiating about who you are, and as that realization sinks into your bones, another question rises from somewhere both terrifying and holy. If this is what changes when one person remembers, what happens when many do? You ask what happens when many remember. The answer is already moving through you. You are not a lone anomaly glitching out of the old reality. You are one filament in a vast, living weave, a human grid stretched across continents, timelines, histories. Each time one of you stops rehearsing your inherited story and starts living from direct perception, a strand lights up. Each time you refuse to betray what you know in your bones, that light stops flickering and becomes stable. From the ground, it looks like isolated awakenings, personal crises, private breakthroughs. From above, it looks like a pattern coming online. Imagine the planet as a dark sphere threaded with potential circuits. Every act of coherence you've chosen, every boundary honored, every truth spoken, every self-betrayal interrupted, has switched one more node from standby to active. For years, it felt like nothing was changing because you were standing inside your own wire, seeing only your section. But entanglement means you have never been working alone. Somewhere, as you learn to trust your perception, another person you will never meet found the courage to leave a life that was killing them. As you dismantled your loyalty to self-contempt, someone else with your same wound felt a little less crazy for wanting something different. As you stopped calling your numbness maturity, another heart, on the edge of collapse, received just enough signal to hold on and recalibrate instead. You didn't see the line of causality. You didn't need to. The field carried it. This is the loom, a structure of consciousness weaving through the quantum field, taking every honest act as thread. No authority presides over it. No institution owns it. It is emergent, self-organizing, built from a single raw material, humans choosing truth over habit in the privacy of their own lives. You felt alone because the old reality taught you to measure connection by proximity and similarity. The new reality measures connection by resonance. You may never share beliefs, aesthetics, or languages with the others who are entangled with you. What you share is a commitment, not to bypass pain, but to stop worshipping it as the only honest way to exist. Not to avoid responsibility, but to stop performing roles that require self-erasure just to be tolerated. Not to escape embodiment, but to inhabit it so fully that your very nervous system becomes a transmitter of coherence. At a certain density, this network crosses its own threshold. Just as your individual life reached a bifurcation point, the collective does too. There comes a moment when enough nodes are active that the baseline field shifts. Patterns that once seemed inevitable start to lose momentum. Realities previously dismissed as naive or impossible begin to feel pragmatically necessary. The old timeline doesn't disappear overnight, it simply stops being the only option. You are living in that crossing. This is why the world feels more polarized, more chaotic, more saturated with noise than ever before. Two realities are arguing through human behavior, one built on unconscious repetition, one built on remembered choice. You can spend your life diagnosing the collapse, or you can quietly, relentlessly embody the alternative. Because here is the final secret. The higher timeline is not somewhere you escape to when the world burns. It is a frequency you hold while you help build what comes after the burning. You will still have days of doubt. You will still face grief, loss, the rawness of being a nervous system on a volatile planet. Higher timelines do not exempt you from being human. They refine what being human means when you are no longer ruled by the same ancient fear. So you walk forward from here with a different orientation. You stop asking, when will things change for me? And start asking, what signal am I emitting into the field right now? You stop waiting for proof that you are on the right path and begin treating your own coherence as the proof. You stop wondering whether you were truly chosen and start behaving like the version of you who already is not in arrogance, but in quiet responsibility. If you are seeing this, your entanglement with the higher timeline isn't theoretical anymore. It is active. It is operational. It is already editing your future. So breathe. Feel your own presence from the inside. Let every cell register this simple, irreversible fact. You are no longer available for the reality that required you to abandon yourself. From this moment onward, every room you enter, every word you speak, every silence you keep becomes part of a larger pattern. The loom of human timelines, weaving a future where coherence is not an exception, but the new baseline. You are not just living in that prophecy. You are helping fulfill it, one uncompromising yes to your own truth at a time. This message did not arrive to impress you. It arrived to remind you what you already are. And now you remember,